Very good morning, friends. So, I hope you're all safe and healthy. Well, I have started a series on Ind AS 113 that deals with fair value measurements, and a couple of videos I have done in the previous week as well. And I'm continuing with the series on Ind AS 113 with you. And today we're going to discuss an interesting concept related to Ind AS 113, and that is identifying the most advantageous market. In the previous video, I was talking in terms of identifying the principal market, but if the principal market cannot be identified, how do we identify the most advantageous market? Let's find out in this video. CPL, सर CPL मतलब चार्टर्ड प्रीमियर लीग। सीए इंटरमीडिएट के बच्चों के लिए डेली अनअकैडमी पर एक कंपटीशन होता है, और ये जो आपका कंपटीशन है, इस कंपटीशन के अंदर 30 मिनट के अंदर आपको 20 क्वेश्चन सॉल्व करने होते हैं, और इसके बेसिस पर आप अपनी नॉलेज टेस्ट कर सकते हैं। तो इंटरमीडिएट के जितने भी पेपर्स हैं उनके लिए आप ये कंपटीशन ले सकते हैं। करना कुछ नहीं है, आपने सिर्फ अनअकैडमी की ऐप डाउनलोड करनी है और साथ में मेरा कोड इस्तेमाल करना है CAKB10, और आप इन सेशंस के अंदर एब्सोल्युटली फ्री पार्टिसिपेट कर सकते हैं। तो आइए, लेट्स क्रैक इट। Well, in the previous video, I had taken the concept of identification of a principal market, which is based on what I call my 3-step model. In which case, I gave you that we start looking into the step number 1, where is the highest, the greatest volume traded in terms of market. And then I said that you also need to simultaneously see in terms of step number 2 that the entity can access that particular market as well. And then if you find out that the entity cannot access that particular market, then you go to the next market where the highest and the greatest volume is traded. Now, in this particular video, what I'm going to do, I'm going to connect you to the principal market as well as the identification, mind the word identification, of the most advantageous market. Let me tell you that there are two aspects. One is identification of a principal market. The other aspect is a computation of a fair value. Now, they are two different things. Similarly, when I'm looking in terms of a most advantageous market, identification is a different exercise and the computation is a different exercise. I'll be throwing a little more light on this in my next video. What is the concept of identification and what is the concept of computation? So here we are looking at only the identification part. Now, if you look at an example to illustrate the concept of identifying the most advantageous market, you can see that there are a total of 4 markets, D, E, F, and G. We're given the price per vehicle, we're given the transaction and the transportation cost, and I'm given the entity's volume, and I'm also given the total market-based volume. Now, there are 2 requirements of this example. Which market is the principal market? And would your answer undergo a change if there is no principal market? Now, I think let's come back to the first issue first of all. Remember, when you're looking at a principal market, in this particular case, I'm not interested in looking at the price. I'm not interested in looking at the transaction or the transport cost. The identification of the principal market only focuses on the market-based volume, which is the last column in my example. And in this particular case, the greatest and the highest volume is traded in terms of market F. So we say the principal market is F. Now that is step number 1. Now, once you've identified in step number 1 that F is supposed to be the principal market, we need to go to the step number 2 and ask ourselves, is the entity able to access this market on the measurement date? Now, in this particular case, I have not given any data whether the entity can access this market or not. Let's assume yes, it can access the market. Now, whether it is selling in that particular market or not is absolutely irrelevant, as we can see that the entity in question is not selling anything in market F, but that doesn't make a difference to me. To the extent we can say it accesses that market on the measurement date, then yes, it is supposed to be the principal market. Now, this answers my first question, that what is a principal market, where only the volumes, the market volumes have got a role to play, values have got no significance. Now, in case we cannot identify that which is a principal market, then Index 113 says that we need to look into that what is the most advantageous market. Now, when you look at the most advantageous market, instead of looking at the volumes, we start looking at the values. Mind, instead of looking at the volumes, we start looking at the values. So look at the market, D as well as G. Now, why I'm not looking at E and F, because I cannot compute, what is the net amount received in the other two markets, because in this particular case, we will ignore those markets, where the entity is not accessing. So let's assume in this particular case that E and F are the markets where the entity is not having any excess. So I would consider the net amount received in value terms for the market D and G. Now, in this particular case, when you look at the market D, 100 minus the transaction and the transportation cost of 5 and 3 works out at 92. And in terms of G, 130 minus 10 and 17 works out at 130. So you need to see that in which particular market the net amount received is supposed to be the highest, because we want to basically maximize the amount to be received in the computation of fair value. But let me tell you, this is only identifying the most advantageous market. The figure of 113 is not the computation of fair value. The identification involves the subtraction of both the transaction cost and the transportation cost. So what do we need to keep in mind when you identify the most advantageous market? I think let's give you the moral of the story. Now, there are two important agendas to be seen. When you're identifying the most advantageous market, we need to see the net amount received from the market which an entity can access. So there are two important things. We're looking at the net amount received and from the market the entity can access. And when you're looking at the most advantageous market, we do not consider the market which entity cannot access. Now, that's like, putting the same thing again. So the two focus points is maximum amount of net money received, that is after transaction and transportation cost, and the market which entity can access. So one thing is very important. You can see in terms of the principal market, it's the volume which plays a role. And in terms of the most advantageous market, it is the value which plays a role. Isn't that interesting? The two V's in terms of identifying the market. So when it is supposed to be the principal market, the market volumes. When it is supposed to be the most advantageous market, it is supposed to be, you can say, the net amount received in terms of value should be maximum. But remember, identification is a different exercise as compared to the computation, which I'm going to deal in the coming videos. So thank you, take care, and bye-bye.